Hi, I'm Olivia. My mother-in-law destroyed our wedding photos, tore them to pieces right in front of me. My husband found the fragments. He was devastated. And that's when I realized she didn't just hate our marriage. She wanted to erase it completely, but she never expected what would happen next. Before we get into it, tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Drop a comment. Because if you've ever had someone try to sabotage your happiness out of spite, this story is for you. When the invitation arrived for Sunday brunch at my mother-in-law Eleanor's estate, I almost declined immediately. It had been 3 months since our wedding. 3 months of thinly veiled hostility and passive-aggressive texts. 3 months of her accidentally calling me by James's ex-girlfriend's name. But something made me pause before hitting delete. James. I called to my husband who was working in his home office. Your mother wants us over for brunch this Sunday. He appeared in the doorway, his expression a mixture of surprise and cautious hope. Really? That's unexpected. I nodded, still staring at the message. No emojis, no warm greeting, just brunch, Sunday, 11 a.m. Cold and formal, like a business meeting rather than family gathering. Maybe she's finally coming around, James said, his voice brightening. Maybe she's ready to accept us. I wanted to believe it too. Despite everything, I knew how much James loved his mother, how desperately he wanted us to get along. Eleanor Wright was a force of nature, wealthy, connected, and accustomed to controlling everything in her orbit, including her only son's life. Maybe, I said, trying to sound optimistic. I'll tell her we'll be there. That night, as I picked out an outfit, carefully selecting a conservative dress that Eleanor might approve of, I reminded myself this wasn't about me. This wasn't about the subtle ways she undermined our relationship or the dismissive glances she shot my way whenever I spoke. This was about James and his happiness. Sunday arrived with perfect spring weather, sunlight streaming through cherry blossoms as we drove through the manicured neighborhoods of Westlake Hills, where Eleanor's 6-bedroom Georgian mansion stood like a fortress on a perfectly landscaped acre. As we pulled through the wrought iron gates, I felt my stomach tighten. It'll be fine, James said, squeezing my hand. Just be yourself. But that was exactly what Eleanor hated, myself. A kindergarten teacher from a middle-class family who had somehow trapped her brilliant son, the tech wonderkind worth billions after selling his cybersecurity startup. The housekeeper answered the door, ushering us into the grand foyer with its sweeping staircase and crystal chandelier. Eleanor appeared moments later, dressed impeccably in a cream Chanel suit, her silver blonde hair perfectly coiffed. James, darling, she said, brushing a kiss against his cheek. Then her eyes slid to me, her smile tightening. Olivia, that dress is different. I swallowed the retort forming on my tongue. Thank you for inviting us, Eleanor. She nodded curtly before turning back to James. The Andersons are already here. And the Blackwells just arrived. I froze. The Andersons, as in Richard and Catherine Anderson, whose daughter Sophia had dated James for 3 years before me, the same Sophia who Eleanor had openly declared would make the perfect daughter-in-law. James shot me an apologetic look as we followed Eleanor to the sunroom, where several couples mingled with mimosas in hand. Richard Anderson approached immediately, clapping James on the shoulder. There he is, the man of the hour. Heard about the new security protocol your team developed. Brilliant stuff. Catherine Anderson nodded politely in my direction before saying, Sophia just got back from Paris yesterday. She was asking about you. Eleanor beamed. Oh, she's doing so well at her gallery. Such a cultured girl. I stood silently, clutching my untouched mimosa, feeling increasingly like an uninvited guest. The conversation swirled around investments, vacation homes, and mutual connections. A world I wasn't part of. When brunch was served on the terrace, I noticed something strange. The table was set beautifully, bone china, crystal glasses, silver cutlery, but there weren't enough places. Eleanor directed everyone to their seats, and I found myself standing awkwardly as the others settled in. Oh dear, Eleanor said with exaggerated concern. It seems we're 1 chair short. Melinda, she called to the housekeeper, fetch another chair for Olivia, would you? I felt my cheeks burn as I waited, standing beside the table while everyone else began serving themselves. When the chair finally arrived, a visibly different style from the others. It was wedged uncomfortably at the corner of the table, half in the sun. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. James looked mortified. "Mother, how could you miscalculate the seating?" Eleanor waved dismissively. "These things happen, darling. Olivia doesn't mind, do you?" Throughout the meal, I was effectively excluded from conversation. Whenever I tried to speak, Eleanor would smoothly interrupt or redirect the discussion. At one point, she accidentally spilled water on my lap while reaching for the salt. "Oh, clumsy me," she said without apology. "Melinda, get a towel for Olivia." After dessert was served, Eleanor stood and clinked her glass. "I have a surprise for everyone. James, this is especially for you." She nodded to the housekeeper, who wheeled in a large screen. "I've had some old family videos digitized. I thought we might take a little trip down memory lane." The lights dimmed, and suddenly there was James as a toddler, taking his first steps. James at his 7th birthday party. James winning a science fair. James at graduation. As the montage continued, I noticed something strange. In clips where I knew I had been present, like James's company launch party 2 years ago, I had been edited out. It was as if I had never existed in his life. Then came footage from various social events, where James appeared with Sophia Anderson on his arm. Eleanor narrated these with particular enthusiasm. "Remember the governor's ball, James? You and Sophia looked so perfect together." I glanced at James, whose jaw had tightened. He reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it in silent apology. As the video ended, Eleanor turned to her guests with a beaming smile. "Wasn't that wonderful? So many precious memories." Richard Anderson nodded appreciatively. "You know, Sophia is still single. Never found anyone who measured up after James." Eleanor sighed dramatically. "Yes, such a shame when the wrong choices are made." The comment hung in the air, its target unmistakable. I stood abruptly. "Excuse me, I need some air." I escaped to the garden, breathing deeply to calm myself. This hadn't been a reconciliation. It had been an ambush, a carefully orchestrated humiliation. James joined me moments later, his expression pained. "Liv, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she would do this." "Didn't you?" I asked quietly. "She's been doing this since we met. Just never so publicly." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "Let's just go. We don't have to stay for this." We made our excuses and left, the drive home filled with tense silence. Back at our penthouse, I kicked off my heels and collapsed onto the sofa. "I don't understand why she hates me so much," I said finally. "What did I ever do except love you?" James sat beside me, taking my hands in his. "She doesn't hate you. She's just controlling. She had a vision for my life and you weren't part of it. A kindergarten teacher instead of an art gallery owner? Someone who grew up in an apartment instead of a mansion?" "It doesn't matter to me," James insisted. "You know that." I nodded, but the day's events had left a hollow feeling in my chest. I just wish she could see me, really see me, not just what I'm not. That night I scrolled through our wedding photos, seeking comfort in the memories of our perfect day, the day we'd pledged our lives to each other on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, surrounded by just our closest friends. Eleanor had attended, of course, wearing an expression more suitable for a funeral than a wedding. James watched me from the doorway. "What are you thinking?" "That I want to print some of these," I said. "Make an album. Something tangible to hold on to." He smiled, joining me on the bed. "I'd like that." The next morning, I sent a carefully selected collection of wedding photos to a high-end printing service. It felt like an act of defiance, preserving what Eleanor seemed determined to erase. When the album arrived a week later, bound in soft white leather with our names embossed in gold, I felt a surge of pride. This was our story, our beginning, untainted by Eleanor's disapproval. "It's beautiful," James said when I showed him that evening. "We should take it when we visit my mom next week for her birthday." I hesitated. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" She needs to accept that this is real, Liv. We're real. And we're not going anywhere. I wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that something as simple as a photo album could bridge the chasm between Eleanor and me. So I agreed. Eleanor's birthday dinner was an elaborate affair at her country club, with dozens of her society friends in attendance. When we presented her with our gift, the wedding album wrapped in silver paper, her smile froze. "How thoughtful," she said, setting it aside without opening it. "You shouldn't have." Throughout dinner, she ignored the album conspicuously placed among her other gifts. When the time came to open presents, she saved ours for last, her reluctance palpable. "A photo album," she announced flatly as she finally unwrapped it. She flipped through a few pages, with barely concealed distaste, before closing it. "Thank you." And just like that, our peace offering was dismissed, placed at the bottom of a pile of expensive perfumes and designer scarves. As we left that night, I noticed Eleanor hand the album to her assistant with whispered instructions. My heart sank, but I said nothing to James. What was the point? 2 weeks passed before we visited Eleanor again, this time for a family dinner with James's Uncle Robert. As James and Robert discussed business in the study, I wandered into Eleanor's pristine living room, looking at the dozens of framed photos arranged on shelves and tables. There were pictures of James at every age and milestone, pictures of Eleanor with celebrities and politicians, pictures of family vacations and holidays, but not a single photo of our wedding, or of me at all. Then I noticed something on her desk, a corner of white leather poking out from beneath some papers. With a quick glance toward the hallway, I pulled it out. It was our wedding album, or what remained of it. The pages had been systematically destroyed, photos torn out, some cut into pieces, others with my face scratched out entirely. Only images of James remained intact. I stood frozen, the mutilated album trembling in my hands. This wasn't just disapproval or resentment. This was hatred, pure and destructive. Find something interesting? I whirled around to find Eleanor in the doorway, her expression cold and challenging. "You destroyed our wedding photos," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She shrugged, unrepentant. "Cheap printing." The pages were coming loose anyway. "These were our memories," I said, anger rising. "How could you do this?" "Don't be dramatic, Olivia. They're just photos. Besides," she stepped closer, her voice dropping, "memories fade, marriages end. Especially marriages that never should have happened in the first place." I clutched the ruined album to my chest. "You really hate me that much? Hate you?" She laughed softly. "That would require me to care. I simply know you're wrong for my son. A temporary mistake he'll eventually correct." Before I could respond, James appeared in the doorway. "Everything okay in here?" Eleanor's demeanor shifted instantly, her smile returning. "Just girl talk, darling. Dinner's ready." I couldn't speak, couldn't even look at James. I just stood there, holding the evidence of his mother's malice, feeling sick to my stomach. "Liv?" James approached, concern in his eyes. Then he saw what I was holding. "What happened to our album?" Eleanor sighed dramatically. "It must have fallen. These mass-produced things are so flimsy." "Fallen?" I finally found my voice. "James, she destroyed it. Look at the photos. They've been deliberately torn, cut up." James took the album from me, his expression darkening as he flipped through the mangled pages. "Mother, did you do this?" Eleanor's mask slipped, just for a moment. "Those photos were ridiculous anyway. That wasn't a real wedding. A handful of people on a windy cliff. No family except me. I was embarrassed to even be there." James stared at his mother, something shifting in his eyes. "We need to go," he said quietly, taking my hand. "Don't be absurd," Eleanor snapped. "I have dinner waiting. Robert came all this way." "I'm sorry, Uncle Robert," James called toward the dining room. "We'll catch up another time." As we headed for the door, Eleanor followed, her composure cracking. You're choosing her over family? Over me? After everything I've done for you? James turned, the ruined album still in his hand. This is my family now, Mother. Olivia is my family. And if you can't respect that, can't respect her, then we have nothing more to discuss. The drive home was silent, the destroyed album sitting between us like a wounded animal. When we reached our building, James handed it to me and said, "Take this up. I need to clear my head. I'll be back soon." I didn't argue. We both needed space to process what had happened. Upstairs, I carefully laid out the damaged photos on our dining table, trying to piece together what could be salvaged. Some were beyond repair, sliced into confetti. Others were merely torn, possibly scannable. But so many precious moments were simply gone. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear splashed onto one of the fragments. This wasn't just about photos. It was about Eleanor's determination to erase me from her son's life, to pretend I didn't exist, that our love wasn't real. Hours passed before James returned, his expression unreadable. He sat across from me at the table, surveying the wreckage of our memories. "I'm so sorry," he said finally. "I never thought she would go this far." I nodded, too exhausted for anger. "What do we do now?" "We set boundaries," he said firmly. "Clear, non-negotiable boundaries." "She won't respect them," I said. "She doesn't respect me, or us, or our marriage." "Then we'll make her understand there are consequences." Something in his tone made me look up. There was a hardness in his eyes I'd never seen before, a resolve that both comforted and unsettled me. "What kind of consequences?" He reached for my hand. "Do you trust me?" "Of course." "Then let me handle this." My mother responds to power, to leverage, and I've just realized I have more than she knows. I didn't press for details. That night, we gathered the salvageable pieces of our wedding photos and placed them in a new box. Tomorrow, I would take them to a restoration specialist. We would rebuild what Eleanor had tried to destroy. As I drifted off to sleep, I heard James on the phone in his office, his voice low and determined. "Yes, all of it. Every last cent. And I want it done quietly." The next morning, James was already gone when I woke, a note on his pillow. "Taking care of things. Back for dinner. Love you." I spent the day at school with my kindergartners, finding comfort in their innocent joy and uncomplicated affection. These children didn't care about my background or bank account. They just knew I read the best stories and always had Band-Aids in my pocket. By the time I got home, James was waiting with takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant and a bottle of champagne. "What are we celebrating?" I asked, setting down my bag of damaged photos. "Justice," he said, a small smile playing at his lips. Or the beginning of it, anyway. We ate dinner, talking about my day, my students, anything but Eleanor. It wasn't until we were curled up on the sofa that James finally explained. "My mother isn't as financially secure as she pretends to be," he began. "Her lifestyle, the house, the country club, the vacations, it's all built on debt. A lot of debt." I frowned, confused. "But I thought your family had money, old money." "They did, once. But my grandfather made some bad investments, and my father wasn't much better. By the time he died, most of the right fortune was gone. Mother's been living on credit and appearances ever since." "How do you know this?" James took a deep breath. "Because as of today, I own all her debt." I stared at him, processing his words. "What do you mean, you own it?" "I mean, I bought it. Every loan, every credit card balance, every mortgage. All of it." "Can you even do that?" He nodded. "With enough money and the right connections, yes. I had my team trace all her debts and purchase them from the various lenders. Legally, she now owes everything to me instead of a dozen different banks and credit companies." I sat back, stunned. "Why?" "Leverage," he said simply. "My mother understands power. Now she'll understand that her power over us, her ability to hurt you, has consequences." So what happens now? You force her to be nice to me, or you'll foreclose on her house. James shook his head. Nothing so crude. Tomorrow, we're having brunch with her. I've already arranged it. James, I don't think... Trust me, Liv. This time will be different. True to his word, the next morning found us pulling up to Eleanor's mansion again. This time, there were no other guests, no elaborate setup, just Eleanor waiting in her pristine living room, looking unusually tense. James, Olivia, she greeted us stiffly. This is unexpected. Is it? James asked, his tone pleasant but firm. I thought my assistant was quite clear about the timing. Eleanor's lips thinned. Yes, well, what is this about? Your message mentions something urgent. It is urgent, James said, taking a seat without waiting to be invited. I sat beside him, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. It's about our future relationship, Mother. Eleanor remained standing, arms crossed. If this is about that photo album, I've already explained. This isn't just about the album, James interrupted. Though that was certainly illuminating. This is about your systematic attempt to undermine my marriage and hurt my wife. That's ridiculous, Eleanor scoffed. You're being melodramatic, just like her. James didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. Do you know what these are? Eleanor glanced at the papers without touching them. Should I? These are the records of your debt, all of it. The mortgage on this house, the equity line of credit you took out last year, the 3 maxed-out credit cards, the loan against your retirement account. The color drained from Eleanor's face. How dare you pry into my personal finances? I didn't just pry, Mother, I purchased them. Eleanor sank slowly into a chair, her composure cracking. What? Every debt you owe now belongs to me. Legally, I'm your creditor. She stared at him, disbelief warring with anger. This is outrageous. You can't do this. I already have, James said calmly. Now I have no intention of calling in these debts or changing the terms. You can continue living exactly as you have been, making the same payments you've been making. Then why? Eleanor demanded, her voice barely controlled. What's the point of this? This invasion? James leaned forward. The point, Mother, is that things are going to change between us. More specifically, between you and Olivia. I watched Eleanor's face as understanding dawned. Her gaze shifted to me, calculating and cold. So that's it, she said bitterly. She put you up to this, using your money to control me, to force me to accept her. Olivia knew nothing about this until last night. James corrected her. This was my decision. Because I've watched you try to erase her from my life for 2 years now. I've watched you humiliate her, exclude her, and now destroy precious memories of our wedding, and I'm done allowing it. Eleanor's laugh was harsh. And now you'll what? Threaten me financially if I don't pretend to like your little school teacher? No, I said, finding my voice at last. That's not what this is about. They both turned to me, surprised. I don't want you to pretend anything, Eleanor, I continued. I don't need you to like me. I don't even need you to respect me, though that would be the decent thing to do. What we need, is for you to stop actively trying to hurt us. James nodded, taking my hand. Exactly. This isn't extortion, Mother. It's a boundary, a consequence. You've shown us who you are and what you're willing to do. Now we're showing you who we are. Eleanor looked between us, her expression hardening. And if I refuse to play along with this charade? If I choose to cut ties completely? That would be your choice, James said quietly. But know this, Olivia is my wife. She is my family. She is my priority. If you force me to choose, you won't like the outcome. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken threats and resentments. Finally, Eleanor stood. I think you should leave now, she said, her voice tight. I need time to process this. We rose together, united. As we reached the door, Eleanor called after us. James, the company shares your father left me. Do those still belong to me, or have you taken those too? James turned, his expression softening slightly. Everything you own is still yours, Mother. I've taken nothing from you. I've simply protected what's mine. In the car, I finally released the breath I'd been holding. Do you think it worked? James shrugged, starting the engine. Maybe, maybe not. But she knows now that her actions have consequences, that we're not just going to smile and take it anymore. I'm worried she'll hate me even more now, I admitted. She might, James agreed. But she'll think twice before acting on that hatred. And honestly, Liv, I don't care if she ever loves you. I just need her to stop trying to destroy what we have. As we drove home, I felt strangely lighter. Not because James had used his financial power. That part actually made me uncomfortable. But because, for the first time, we were truly united against Eleanor's manipulations. No more excuses. No more second chances. No more benefit of the doubt. That evening, as we sat on our balcony watching the sunset over the city, my phone pinged with a message. It was from Eleanor, the first direct communication she'd ever initiated with me. We should talk. Alone. Tomorrow at the club. 1 p.m. I showed it to James, uncertainty swirling in my stomach. Should I go? He studied the message, then me. Do you want to? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to ignore her forever, but another part wants resolution. He finished for me. I understand, but remember, you don't owe her anything. Not your time, not your forgiveness, not even a response. I nodded, thinking. I'll go, I decided, finally. But on my terms, not at her club, where she holds all the social capital. Somewhere neutral. I typed a reply. I can meet at Riverside Cafe at 1. Just us. Eleanor's response came almost immediately. Fine. That night, I barely slept, rehearsing what I might say, imagining Eleanor's potential tactics. By morning, I felt simultaneously exhausted and wired, like I'd had too much coffee and too little rest. You sure about this? James asked as I got dressed in simple jeans and a blouse. My clothes, not an outfit chosen to impress Eleanor. No, I admitted, but I think it's necessary. He kissed me goodbye at the door. Remember who you are, Liv. Don't let her make you feel small. I arrived at Riverside Cafe early, deliberately choosing a table by the window where I could see Eleanor approach. This wasn't about ambushing her or playing games. It was about meeting as equals, on neutral ground, with clear eyes. She arrived precisely at 1 o'clock, dressed in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, her makeup flawless, armor against vulnerability. She spotted me immediately, her expression giving nothing away as she approached. Olivia, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. No air kisses today. No false warmth. Eleanor, I replied. Thank you for coming. The waiter appeared, and we both ordered just coffee for her, a sandwich and iced tea for me. When he left, silence stretched between us, taut as a wire. Well, she finally said, her manicured fingers tapping against the table. You wanted to meet, so talk. I took a deep breath. Actually, you asked to meet with me. You said we should talk. Her lips thinned. I assumed you'd have demands, given your husband's tactics. This isn't about demands, I said quietly. This is about understanding why you've been trying to erase me from James's life since the day we met. Eleanor's laugh was sharp, brittle. Erase you? Don't be melodramatic. You destroyed our wedding photos, I said, keeping my voice level. You edited me out of family videos. You set me up for humiliation in front of your friends. What would you call it? She looked away, staring out the window. For a moment, I caught a glimpse of something in her eyes. Not remorse, exactly, but perhaps recognition. You're not right for him, she said finally. You never have been. Because I'm not wealthy? Because I teach kindergarten instead of running a gallery or a charity? Because you can't possibly understand his world, she snapped. Do you have any idea what it means to be married to a man like James? The scrutiny, the expectations, the social obligations? I understand loving him, I said simply. I understand supporting his dreams and being honest with him. I understand making him laugh when he's stressed and giving him space when he needs to think. Eleanor's expression hardened. Naive. So naive. You think love is enough? There are 1,000 women who could love James. He needed someone who could stand beside him in the world he inhabits. The world you inhabit. I corrected her. James has never cared about social status or connections. He cares about innovation, about making a difference. Easy to say when you've never had to worry about losing everything, Eleanor said, her voice suddenly tight, when you've never had to smile through humiliation just to keep your place at the table. Our drinks arrived, creating a momentary pause in the conversation. I studied Eleanor as she methodically stirred sweetener into her coffee, her movements precise and controlled. For the first time, I wondered about the woman behind the perfect facade. What do you mean, losing everything? I asked carefully. Eleanor looked up, as if she'd said more than she intended. Nothing. It's irrelevant. It's not irrelevant if it's affecting how you see me, how you treat our marriage. She took a sip of coffee, gathering herself. My husband, James's father, was brilliant. A visionary, everyone said. He had ideas that could change the world. Like James, I said softly. A flicker of something. Pain, perhaps, crossed her face. Yes, like James. But Harold's brilliance came with gaps. He could conceptualize groundbreaking technologies, but couldn't manage money to save his life. Couldn't read people, couldn't tell when he was being manipulated. I waited, sensing there was more. He trusted the wrong people, Eleanor continued, her voice distant. Made investments based on friendship rather than business sense. And when it all collapsed, when the right fortune was decimated overnight. Do you know what happened? I shook my head. Every door that had been opened to us suddenly closed. Friends who'd dined at our table for years couldn't return our calls. The women who'd sought my advice on charity boards suddenly didn't need my input. We were still invited places. The right names still carried weight, but as cautionary tales, not equals. She straightened her already perfect posture. I worked for years to rebuild our social standing, to protect James from the whispers and the pity. I made sure he had every advantage, every connection. I wasn't going to let him make his father's mistakes. Marrying me being one of them? I asked. You have no idea what you've walked into, Eleanor said, leaning forward. The technology world seems progressive, seems merit-based, but underneath it's the same old power structures. The same judgments. The same cruelty toward those who don't belong. And you think I don't belong? I know you don't, she said, but without the venom I'd expected. Not because you're not good enough, Olivia. Because you're not prepared. You don't know the rules of the game, and people will use that against both of you. I considered her words, turning them over. There was something almost protective in her tone, twisted as her methods had been. So destroying our wedding photos? That was your way of protecting James? Eleanor had the grace to look uncomfortable. That was regrettable, a moment of weakness. Weakness, I repeated. You deliberately destroyed some of the most precious memories we have. You can take more pictures, she said dismissively. That's not the point, and you know it, I said, feeling my patience thin. You were trying to erase our marriage, symbolically if not legally. She didn't deny it. Instead, she asked, "What do you want from me, Olivia? A tearful apology? A promise to welcome you with open arms? To pretend I believe this marriage will last?" I want you to stop actively trying to hurt us, I said. I want you to respect that James chose me, whether you understand that choice or not. And yes, I want you to apologize for destroying our photos. Not to me, but to James. He deserved better from his mother. Eleanor studied me, her expression calculating. And if I don't, James will what? Foreclose on my house? Ruin me financially? I have no idea what James would do, I said honestly. That's between you and him. This conversation is between you and me. And what would you do? She pressed. I considered the question seriously. I would make sure James never had to choose between us, by removing myself from any situation where you're present. I would protect him from having to witness your disrespect toward me or our marriage. I would create distance that he doesn't actually want but might need. Something in Eleanor's expression shifted. Surprise, perhaps, or reluctant respect. You really do love him, she said, as if the concept was just now becoming real to her. More than anything, I confirmed. Enough to stand up to you, which is honestly terrifying. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I'm not terrifying. You absolutely are. I disagreed. But that doesn't mean you're right. Our food arrived, and we fell into silence again. I ate my sandwich while Eleanor sipped her coffee, both of us processing the conversation so far. I can't promise to approve, she said finally. I can't promise we'll ever be close. I'm not asking for that. But, she continued, I can acknowledge that my behavior has been excessive, particularly regarding the photos. That was beneath me. It wasn't exactly an apology, but from Eleanor, right, it felt monumental. Thank you, I said simply. She nodded once, then changed the subject. Tell me about your work. James says you're quite dedicated to your students. The conversation that followed wasn't warm or intimate, but it was civil. Eleanor asked questions about my teaching philosophy, my background, my family. Her interest seemed clinical rather than friendly, as if she were finally conducting proper due diligence on her son's choice of wife. But it was a start. As we prepared to leave, Eleanor paused. About the debts? That's between you and James, I said firmly. I'm not part of that conversation. She studied me with new eyes. You really don't care about the money, do you? Not beyond what we need to be comfortable and secure, I confirmed. It's never been about that for me. Eleanor gathered her purse, standing to leave. I'll speak with James about the photos, and I'll consider what you've said today. It wasn't a promise of transformation. It wasn't even a guarantee of better behavior. But as I watched her walk away, her spine straight and her head high, I felt something shift between us. Not friendship, not even mutual respect yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. When I arrived home, James was waiting anxiously. How did it go? Are you okay? I kicked off my shoes and collapsed beside him on the sofa. It was illuminating. Not exactly pleasant, but not the disaster I expected either. I recounted the conversation, watching his expression shift between concern, surprise, and thoughtfulness. She actually talked about Dad's financial mistakes? He asked, clearly stunned. She never discusses that with anyone. Not even me. I think she was trying to explain herself, I said. Not excuse her behavior, exactly, but provide context. James shook his head slowly. She's been carrying that shame for decades. The social humiliation, the whispers, the pitying looks. It nearly destroyed her. It doesn't justify what she did to our photos, James. No, he agreed immediately. Nothing justifies that, but it helps me understand why she's so fixated on appearances, on social standing. She's been terrified of losing it all again. That evening, as we were preparing dinner, James's phone rang. Eleanor. He put it on speaker so I could hear. James, she began, her voice unusually hesitant. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and my discussion with Olivia today. And? James prompted when she paused. And I believe I owe you both an apology. What I did to your wedding album was inexcusable. It was petty and cruel, and beneath the standards I've tried to uphold. James and I exchanged surprised glances. Thank you for saying that, Mother, James said carefully. I'd like to make amends, she continued. I've spoken with Marianne Chen. You remember, the art restorer who saved that Degas sketch after the gallery flood? She believes she can repair some of the damaged photos, or at least create high-quality reproductions from the digital files, if you have them. I felt tears spring to my eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. It was such a small thing compared to the hurt she'd caused, and yet it felt monumental. We do have the files, James confirmed. The photographer gave us everything. Good, Eleanor said briskly. Then if you'll send them to me, I'll handle the arrangements. It's the least I can do. After the call ended, James pulled me into a hug. Well, that was unexpected. Do you think she means it? I asked, still wary. Or is this just because you bought her debt? With my mother, it's never simple, James admitted. But I do think your conversation affected her. You have a way of getting through to people, Liv. It's what makes you such a great teacher. The next few weeks brought subtle changes. Eleanor didn't suddenly become warm or maternal, but the active hostility ceased. She invited us to dinner, just the three of us, and made a visible effort to include me in the conversation. She asked about my students, remembered their names when I mentioned them again, even suggested books that might appeal to one struggling reader. When she hosted a charity gala the following month, our place settings were positioned properly at the table, no last-minute adjustments needed. She introduced me to her friends without the subtle undermining remarks that had been her specialty. It wasn't affection, but it was respect, or at least a convincing performance of it. Progress, James whispered as we drove home that night. Slow, but real. I nodded, still processing the evening. I'm not letting my guard down completely, but it's better. Much better, he agreed. And I haven't said anything about the debt since our confrontation. This isn't fear or manipulation. This is her choice. 2 months after our meeting at Riverside Cafe, a package arrived at our door. Inside was a new wedding album, bound in the same white leather as the original. When we opened it, I gasped. The photos had been not just restored, but enhanced. Marianne Chen had worked magic, creating luminous images that captured every detail of our clifftop ceremony. The way the light had played on the ocean, the wildflowers in my bouquet, the look in James's eyes as he spoke his vows. And there, on the final page, was something unexpected, a handwritten note from Eleanor. Beauty deserves to be preserved, not destroyed. I was wrong. Gif die Dage. It wasn't effusive. It wasn't even particularly warm. But from Eleanor Wright, it was revolutionary. That night, James called his mother. The album is beautiful, he said simply. Thank you. Marianne does excellent work, Eleanor replied, her voice carefully neutral. I'm glad you're pleased. A pause then. I've been thinking about what you said, about your relationship with Olivia being your priority. You're very much your father's son in that way. What do you mean? James asked. Harold always knew what mattered. When everything was crumbling around us, he told me none of it was important as long as we had each other. I thought he was being naive, that he didn't understand what we were losing. Her voice softened. Perhaps I was the one who didn't understand what was truly valuable. After they hung up, James sat quietly for a long time, staring at the restored photos. She's never compared me to my father that way before, he said finally. Like it was a compliment, not a warning. I rested my head on his shoulder. People can surprise you. Even Eleanor Wright. Especially Eleanor Wright. I smiled, though I'm still keeping my guard up. The real test came 3 months later, when James's company faced a potential security breach. For days, he worked around the clock, coming home only to shower and change before returning to the office. The tech blogs were circling, investors were nervous, and the pressure was immense. I was at school when my phone buzzed with a text from an unexpected source. Eleanor. James needs to rest. He won't listen to me. Maybe he'll listen to you. It was the first time she'd ever suggested I might know what was best for her son. I replied immediately. I've been trying. He's being stubborn. 3 dots appeared then. He gets that from both sides. I'm going to his office with food. You should join me. I stared at the message, baffled. Was this a trap? A test? Or was Eleanor actually reaching out in genuine concern for James? After school, I headed to James's company headquarters, stopping to pick up his favorite coffee on the way. In the lobby, Eleanor was waiting, a large bag from an upscale deli in hand. He's been living on energy drinks and protein bars, she said by way of greeting. Ridiculous. Completely ridiculous, I agreed, holding up the coffee. And this is just a bribe to get him to take a break. Eleanor's lips twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Well, let's see if our combined efforts can knock some sense into him. We rode the elevator in companionable silence, united in our concern. When we reached James's office, he looked up from his computer, dark circles under his eyes, his expression changing from stress to surprise as he registered the two of us standing together. "Mother! Liv, what are you doing here?" "Intervention," I said, placing the coffee on his desk. "You look terrible," Eleanor added bluntly, unpacking containers of food. "When did you last sleep properly?" James blinked between us, clearly disoriented by our joint appearance. "Are you two working together now?" "We both care about you," I said simply. "Different ways, different reasons, but the concern is the same." Eleanor nodded curtly. "Eat something substantial and take a nap. Your team can manage for a few hours." To my amazement, James complied, too exhausted to argue with both of us. As he ate, Eleanor and I discussed the situation, strategizing ways to manage the crisis. She offered to call several influential tech journalists she knew, subtly steering the narrative. I suggested bringing in dinner for the entire team, boosting morale during the long hours. "That's actually quite sensible," Eleanor conceded. James watched us, a bemused expression replacing his exhaustion. "Is this really happening right now?" "Eat your sandwich," we said in unison, then exchanged startled glances. It wasn't friendship, not yet. But it was a truce born of shared love for the same person. And sometimes, that's enough to build upon. The security crisis was resolved within days, thanks to James's brilliant team and some well-placed calls from Eleanor. When the dust settled, James insisted on a proper dinner to thank us both. "To the two most formidable women I know," he toasted, raising his glass, "who finally found common ground." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Let's not exaggerate. We simply recognized a mutual interest." "That's more than I ever expected," James said honestly. "Life is full of surprises," Eleanor replied, glancing at me. "Some of them even turn out to be improvements." It wasn't a declaration of affection or acceptance. But from Eleanor Wright, it was a revolution. As we left the restaurant that night, Eleanor pulled me aside briefly. "I still think you're naive about many things," she said quietly. "But I was wrong about one thing." "What's that?" I asked. "You do belong in his world. Because you've created it together." She smoothed her already perfect jacket. "Don't make me regret saying that." I smiled. "I wouldn't dream of it." The restored wedding album sits on our coffee table now. A reminder not just of our perfect day, but of the battle fought and won afterward. Eleanor visits once a month, still formal, still careful, but no longer hostile. She's even started bringing small gifts for my students. Expensive ones, of course, but thoughtfully chosen. Last week, I noticed something new in her living room, a small silver frame on the mantel, holding a photo of James and me from our wedding day. Not prominently displayed, not drawing attention, but there. Present. Acknowledged. When she caught me looking at it, she simply said, "Marianne did good work with the restoration." It wasn't an embrace. It wasn't even particularly warm. But from Eleanor Wright, it was everything. Sometimes the deepest wounds come from the people who should love us most. And sometimes healing begins not with grand gestures, but with small acknowledgments. A photo returned to its rightful place, a text message sent in concern, a boundary respected. Eleanor Wright didn't destroy our wedding photos because she was evil. She destroyed them because she was afraid. Afraid of change, afraid of loss, afraid that her carefully constructed world would crumble again. Understanding that didn't excuse her actions, but it made forgiveness possible. And forgiveness, I've learned, isn't about forgetting the hurt or pretending it never happened. It's about choosing to move forward unburdened by resentment, creating space for something new to grow in its place. James and I celebrate our anniversary next week, 3 years of building a life together. Eleanor has offered to host a small dinner at her home. "Nothing elaborate, just family," she said, using that word for the first time. We said yes. Family isn't just about blood or background or social standing. It's about choice, choosing to see each other, to respect each other, to work through the hard parts because the connection matters more than being right. The woman who destroyed our wedding photos will never be the mother I dreamed of having. But she is learning to be the mother-in-law James and I need. Imperfect, complicated, but present. And sometimes that's enough to build upon. To anyone watching this who's faced rejection from family, who's been made to feel they don't belong, your worth isn't determined by their acceptance. Your love isn't validated by their approval, and your future isn't limited by their fears. Stand your ground, speak your truth, set your boundaries. But leave the door open, just a crack, for transformation, not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace. Have you ever had to stand up to family for the sake of your relationship? How did you handle it? Drop a comment below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. The dinner at Eleanor's home to celebrate our anniversary wasn't just a meal. It was a milestone. 3 years earlier, I would have never imagined sitting at her table as anything but an unwelcome intruder. Now she greeted us at the door with a stiff but genuine smile, ushering us into a home that no longer felt like enemy territory. "I've prepared something special," she announced, leading us to the dining room. The table was set beautifully, of course. Eleanor didn't know how to do things halfway. But what caught my breath was the centerpiece. A custom crystal frame holding a triptych of photos. Our wedding day in the center, flanked by a candid shot of James and me laughing at a charity event, and a more recent image of the three of us at James's company celebration. "Mother," James said softly, clearly moved. "It's beautiful." Eleanor straightened a fork that was already perfectly aligned. "Well, I thought it appropriate for the occasion." I touched the frame gently. "Thank you, Eleanor. This means a lot." She nodded briskly, emotion hidden behind her usual composure. "Shall we have champagne before dinner?" That evening flowed with surprising ease. Eleanor asked about my kindergarten class, sharing a story about James's own early school days. James talked about his latest project, and for once, Eleanor listened more than she advised. It wasn't the warm family dinner of movies and commercials, but it was authentic. 3 people making a genuine effort to connect across the chasms that had once divided them. As we were finishing dessert, a decadent chocolate creation from James's favorite bakery, Eleanor cleared her throat. "I've been meaning to discuss something with you both," she said, her tone shifting to something more formal. "About the financial arrangement." James tensed beside me. "Mother, that's not—" "Please," she interrupted. "Let me finish." She folded her napkin precisely. "I've arranged to refinance my debts through traditional channels. The paperwork should be complete by the end of the month." I blinked in surprise. "You're paying James back?" "Not exactly," Eleanor clarified. "I'm transferring the debts back to conventional lenders. James will no longer be my creditor." James studied his mother carefully. "May I ask why?" "The terms I offered were more favorable than you'll get elsewhere." "Because," Eleanor said with uncharacteristic directness, "family relationships shouldn't be complicated by financial leverage. It's not healthy." I almost dropped my fork. Eleanor right acknowledging something as being unhealthy in a relationship? The woman who had wielded emotional manipulation like a finely honed weapon? "I'm surprised," James admitted. "But I respect your decision." Eleanor nodded once. "Good, that's settled then." She rose, gathering her composure like a familiar cloak. "Coffee in the sitting room?" Later that night, as James and I drove home, he shook his head in amazement. "I never thought I'd see the day. My mother voluntarily giving up a financial advantage to improve a relationship." "People can change," I said, watching the city lights blur past the window. "Even Eleanor Wright." "Even Eleanor Wright," he agreed, reaching for my hand. The next morning, I was getting ready for school when my phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. My stomach still instinctively tightened whenever I saw her name on my screen. Old habits die hard. But I opened it without hesitation. "Olivia, would you consider meeting me at Martian Gallery tomorrow at 2? There's an exhibition I think might interest you. E." I stared at the message, baffled. Art galleries were Eleanor's domain, not mine. Was this another test? Another opportunity for her to highlight the cultural gap between us? James read the message over my shoulder. "You should go," he said. "She's making an effort." "To do what?" I asked skeptically. "Remind me how little I know about fine art? Or maybe to share something she cares about," James suggested. "This is how she connects with people she respects." That word, respects, gave me pause. Had Eleanor finally come to respect me? However grudgingly. I typed back, "I'll be there. Thank you for thinking of me." The following afternoon, I met Eleanor at Marchand Gallery, an exclusive space in the arts district that typically showcased cutting-edge contemporary artists. She was waiting outside, elegant as always in a camel coat and simple gold jewelry. "Thank you for coming," she said, her tone businesslike. "The artist is a former student of mine from when I lectured at the university. I think you'll find her work relevant." We entered the gallery, a sleek minimalist space with polished concrete floors and stark white walls. The exhibition was titled Preservation, a single word emblazoned on the entry wall in bold typography. As we moved through the space, I began to understand why Eleanor had brought me here. The artist, Maya Bennett, worked with damaged photographs and forgotten mementos, transforming them into powerful installations about memory, loss, and reclamation. In one piece, torn family photos were meticulously reassembled and mounted on transparent panels, creating layered shadows that shifted as you moved around them. In another, discarded love letters were woven into a tapestry that spelled out "Remember" when viewed from a distance. Her work explores how we preserve what matters, Eleanor explained as we paused before a particularly striking piece. A wedding album that had been partially burned, then encased in resin with gold filling the damaged areas, reminiscent of the Japanese art of kintsugi, how we repair what's broken and how the repair becomes part of the story. I looked at Eleanor, truly seeing her in that moment. "Is that why you brought me here?" She met my gaze directly. "I thought you might appreciate the metaphor." It wasn't an apology. Eleanor had already offered that in her own way. This was something different. An acknowledgement that our story, hers, mine, James's, now included both damage and repair, and was perhaps more meaningful for having survived both. "I do appreciate it," I said quietly. "Very much." We continued through the exhibition, and to my surprise, Eleanor began sharing stories about artists she had known, about her early days studying art history before she married into the Wright family, about the painting that had first moved her to tears as a young woman. "I wanted to be a curator," she confessed as we sat in the gallery cafe afterward. "Before I met Harold, before everything changed, that was my dream." "Why didn't you pursue it after James was grown?" I asked. Eleanor's smile was tinged with regret. "By then, I was too invested in maintaining appearances. The idea of starting over, of being a novice again, it seemed impossible." I thought about that revelation for days afterward. The formidable Eleanor Wright had once been a young woman with dreams beyond social status and perfect dinner parties. Understanding that didn't erase the hurt she had caused, but it added dimension to the flat image I'd held of her for so long. The following week, I was sorting through books in my classroom when my principal appeared at the door. "Olivia, there's someone here to see you. Says she's your mother-in-law." I nearly dropped the stack of picture books I was holding. "Eleanor? At my school?" It seemed impossible, but there she was, standing in the hallway, looking simultaneously imperious and oddly out of place among the children's artwork and motivational posters. "Eleanor," I said, genuinely confused. "Is everything okay? Is James?" "Everything's fine," she assured me quickly. "I was in the neighborhood for a board meeting and thought I might see where you work." I blinked in surprise but recovered quickly. "Of course. Would you like a tour?" I showed her my classroom with its reading corner, art station, and wall of student self-portraits. To my amazement, Eleanor asked thoughtful questions about my teaching approach and the resources available to my students. "The library seems rather limited," she observed, scanning the bookshelves, "and some of these books are quite worn." "School budgets," I explained with a shrug. We make do with what we have, and I pick up books at garage sales when I can. Eleanor frowned slightly, but said nothing more about it. As she prepared to leave, she paused at the door. Thank you for showing me around, Olivia. I understand better now. Understand what? I asked. Why you do this, despite having access to James's resources. It clearly matters to you. It was such a small thing, recognizing that my work had value, that I chose it not out of necessity but passion. Yet coming from Eleanor, it felt monumental. 3 days later, a delivery truck arrived at the school, 6 large boxes addressed to my classroom. Inside were hundreds of brand new books. Picture books, early readers, chapter books, reference materials, along with a state-of-the-art digital reading tablet and a gift card for educational supplies. The note simply read, "For your students." I called her immediately. Eleanor, this is incredibly generous. It's practical, she countered, her tone matter-of-fact. Children need proper resources. Still, thank you. The kids are going to be thrilled. She cleared her throat. Yes, well. I also wanted to tell you that I've recommended you for the Education Committee at the Wright Foundation, if you're interested. I nearly dropped the phone. The Wright Foundation was one of the most prestigious philanthropic organizations in the city, known for funding innovative educational initiatives. Being on their education committee would mean having a voice in how substantial resources were allocated to schools across the region. Are you serious? I managed. I don't joke about foundation business, Olivia, Eleanor said crisply. The committee needs someone with actual classroom experience. Your perspective would be valuable. Coming from Eleanor Wright, this was the highest possible praise. I'd be honored, I said sincerely. Good. I'll have them send you the details. A pause. And Olivia? Don't feel you need to defer to the other committee members simply because they have fancier titles. Your expertise is equally valid. After we hung up, I sat among the boxes of books, trying to process what had just happened. Eleanor hadn't just acknowledged my career, she had actively validated it, leveraging her own influence to amplify my voice in a sphere where I could make broader impact. That evening, I recounted the conversation to James, who looked simultaneously shocked and delighted. She's never invited anyone into the foundation inner circle, he said. Not even Sophia, and she adored Sophia. I think adored is a stretch, I replied, remembering the calculated way Eleanor had wielded Sophia's name to hurt me. True, James acknowledged. She approved of Sophia. That's not the same thing. Do you think she approves of me now? I asked, surprised to find I actually cared about the answer. James considered the question seriously. I think she respects you. Which, knowing my mother, is far more significant than approval. The Education Committee proved to be both challenging and rewarding. At first, the other members, university presidents, business leaders, veteran philanthropists, regarded me with polite skepticism. What could a kindergarten teacher possibly contribute to high-level discussions about educational policy and multi-million-dollar grant distributions? But Eleanor, to my ongoing amazement, consistently created space for my input. Olivia, you have direct experience with this issue. What's your perspective? Or, before we vote, I'd like to hear from Olivia about how this would actually function in a classroom. By the third meeting, the other committee members were asking for my thoughts unprompted. By the fifth, I had been tasked with leading a subcommittee on early childhood education initiatives. After that meeting, Eleanor and I walked to the parking garage together. You're making quite an impression, she observed. Chancellor Williams was quoting you earlier. I noticed, I said, still a bit stunned by the whole experience. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, Eleanor. She adjusted her scarf against the autumn chill. You earned it. The foundation will benefit from your perspective. We reached her car first, a sleek, silver Mercedes parked in a reserved spot. Eleanor paused before opening the door. James mentioned you're having dinner with your parents this weekend. Yes, I confirmed, surprised by the shift in topic. They're driving up from Portland. Would you consider extending an invitation to brunch on Sunday? Here at the club. She gestured to the Foundation's building, which also housed an exclusive social club on the top floor. I should meet them properly. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. In all our years of careful navigation and gradual thawing, Eleanor had never once suggested meeting my family. Even at our wedding, she had exchanged only the most perfunctory greetings with my parents before keeping her distance. You want to meet my parents? I finally managed. Is that so surprising? She asked, though her slight smile suggested she knew exactly how unexpected this was. They're James's in-laws. My relations by marriage. Family. She still couldn't quite say the word, but she was acknowledging the connection. I'll ask them, I promised. I'm sure they'd be delighted. Eleanor nodded briskly. Good. Let me know their dietary restrictions, if any. As she drove away, I stood in the parking garage, keys in hand, marveling at how far we had come from those early days of active hostility. My parents, down-to-earth Oregonians with no pretensions to social status, were understandably nervous about brunch, with the formidable Eleanor Wright. My mother called me 3 times to confirm what she should wear. Just be yourselves, I assured them. That's what changed her mind about me, eventually. The brunch itself was a study in contrasts. My father in his one good blazer that he wore to weddings and funerals, my mother in a floral dress from a department store, both of them facing Eleanor in her tailored St. John's suit and subtle diamond earrings. Yet to everyone's surprise, including my own, they found common ground almost immediately. My father, a high school science teacher, engaged Eleanor in a thoughtful discussion about educational funding disparities. My mother, a librarian with a passion for art history books, discovered that Eleanor had once cataloged a private collection she had studied in graduate school. By the time dessert arrived, they were exchanging contact information and making plans for my parents to tour the Foundation's art collection during their next visit. Your parents are quite knowledgeable, Eleanor commented as we said our goodbyes. I can see where you get your intellectual curiosity. From Eleanor, this was high praise indeed. As months passed, a new pattern emerged. Eleanor began inviting us to smaller, more intimate gatherings rather than large social events. She asked questions about my work and actually listened to the answers. She stopped mentioning Sophia Anderson entirely. One evening, as we were leaving a dinner at her home, she handed me a small, wrapped package. This arrived yesterday, she explained. It's from the estate sale I mentioned. Inside was a first edition of a beloved children's book I had once mentioned in passing, a book my grandmother had read to me as a child, now long out of print. Eleanor? I breathed, carefully turning the delicate pages. This is incredible. How did you even remember I loved this book? Contrary to popular belief, she said dryly, I do listen when people speak. I looked up at her, this complicated woman who had once been my greatest adversary and was now… What? Not quite a friend, not quite a mother figure, but something unique and evolving. Thank you, I said simply. Not just for this. For trying. For allowing things to change. Eleanor's expression softened momentarily. Change is inevitable, Olivia. The question is whether we resist it to our detriment or shape it to our advantage. She straightened her already perfect posture. I'm merely being practical. I smiled, recognizing the deflection for what it was. Eleanor's way of maintaining her dignity while acknowledging growth. Of course, I agreed. Very practical. As spring arrived, bringing our 4th wedding anniversary, James and I discussed how to celebrate. We could go back to the cliff where we got married, he suggested. Make some new memories there. I considered the idea, tracing patterns on his arm as we lay in bed. Actually, I had another thought. What if we invited your mother to join us for part of the celebration? Not the whole day, obviously, but maybe dinner. James propped himself up on one elbow, studying my face. Are you serious? You want to include my mother in our anniversary? Just for dinner, I clarified, and only if you want to. It just seems like, I don't know, a way to acknowledge how far we've all come. He kissed me softly. Have I told you lately that you're remarkable? Not since breakfast, I teased. When we extended the invitation, Eleanor seemed genuinely surprised. Your anniversary should be private, she demurred. You don't need to include me out of some sense of obligation. It's not obligation, I assured her. It's recognition. Of growth, of change. She considered this, then nodded once. In that case, I would be honored. We chose a restaurant new to all of us, neutral territory with no history or associations. Eleanor arrived exactly on time, as always, bearing a small package wrapped in silver paper. Just a token, she said, placing it on the table. For both of you. Inside was a crystal frame, elegantly simple, holding a photo I had never seen before. It showed James and me at our wedding, foreheads touching, smiles radiant, the ocean stretching endlessly behind us. But the remarkable thing was Eleanor herself, visible at the edge of the frame, watching us with an expression I had never seen her wear, a mixture of resignation and dawning acceptance. I had forgotten this was taken, she admitted. Marianne found it while organizing my photo archives. She thought it captured something important. It did. It captured the exact moment when the battle lines began to blur, when possibility first flickered, however faintly. It's perfect, James said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you, Mother. Eleanor nodded, accepting his gratitude with typical reserve. Now, she said briskly, opening her menu, I believe this restaurant is known for its seafood. Shall we order? The evening flowed with surprising ease. Conversation about James's latest project, my students, spring performance, Eleanor's upcoming gallery exhibition. No tension, no barbed comments, no careful navigation of emotional minefields. Just three people sharing a meal, connected by choice as much as circumstance. As dessert arrived, Eleanor raised her glass. To 4 years, she said simply, and to many more. It wasn't effusive, it wasn't sentimental, but from Eleanor Wright, it was revolutionary. Later that night, as James and I walked along the waterfront, stars speckling the sky above us, I thought about the journey we had taken, not just as a couple, but as an unlikely trio learning to coexist, then cooperate, then genuinely connect. Do you think we'll ever be a normal family? I asked, tucking my hand into the crook of his arm. James laughed softly. Normal is overrated. We're something more interesting. And what's that? He considered the question as we paused at the railing, watching moonlight dance across the water. Resilient, he decided. Adaptive. Evolving. I leaned against him, savoring his warmth in the cool night air. I'll take it. The path forward wasn't perfect or assured. Eleanor would always be Eleanor. Formal, reserved, occasionally prickly. But she was trying, in her own way, to build something new from the ashes of what she had once destroyed. And isn't that the most human story of all? Not perfect redemption or fairy tale transformation, but the messy, halting journey towards something better. The courage to acknowledge harm done. The willingness to change. The grace to allow others to change, too. My mother-in-law once destroyed our wedding photos in a desperate attempt to erase a truth she couldn't accept. Now she helps preserve memories she once tried to obliterate. Not because she's become someone else entirely, but because she's become a more complete version of herself, one who can acknowledge mistakes, respect differences, and yes, even grow. Sometimes the most beautiful restorations aren't of photos or objects, but of possibilities once thought lost. Of relationships that survive the fire and emerge, not unscathed, but stronger in the broken places. 5 years into our marriage, life had found a new rhythm. James's company had grown exponentially. My work with the education committee was making real impact in schools across the region. And Eleanor had settled into the role of respectful mother-in-law. Not warm, exactly, but consistently civil and occasionally even thoughtful. Then came the phone call that changed everything. I was in my classroom after school, preparing for parent-teacher conferences, when my cell phone rang. Eleanor's name flashed on the screen. Still, after all this time, my first reaction was a flicker of anxiety. Eleanor, is everything okay? Her voice was tight, controlled. There's been an accident. James. He's at Memorial Hospital. The world tilted. What happened? How bad is it? Car accident. He's in surgery. A pause, then words I never expected to hear from Eleanor Wright. I need you to come. Please. I drove to the hospital in a fog, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The same thoughts circled relentlessly. Not James. Not my husband. Not the center of my world. When I reached the surgical waiting room, Eleanor was already there, her usual perfect composure fractured around the edges. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her lipstick faded, her eyes haunted. What happened? I asked, dropping into the chair beside her. Head-on collision on the bridge. Drunk driver crossed the median. Her voice was mechanical, as if speaking from a great distance. James swerved to avoid a direct hit. His car went through the guardrail. Into the water? I gasped. She shook her head. Onto the embankment below. The car rolled several times. I pressed my hands to my mouth, trying to hold back the sob building in my throat. How bad? Internal bleeding. Broken ribs. Possible spinal injury. Eleanor recited the list with clinical detachment, but her hands trembled in her lap. They wouldn't tell me more. I'm not. Immediate family. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, Eleanor had positioned herself as James's most important relationship, relegating me to the periphery. Now, in this sterile waiting room with its 2 bright lights and uncomfortable chairs, our roles were legally reversed. I'll talk to the doctors, I promised. Get complete information. Eleanor nodded stiffly. Thank you. We sat in tense silence for what felt like hours, united in our fear yet separated by years of complicated history. Finally, I reached over and placed my hand over hers. After a moment's hesitation, she turned her palm upward, her fingers gripping mine with surprising strength. When the surgeon finally appeared, both of us rose as one. Mrs. Wright? He asked, looking between us. I'm his wife, I said quickly. This is his mother. The surgeon nodded. The surgery was successful. We've stopped the internal bleeding and stabilized his condition. However, there's significant trauma. Multiple fractures, including several vertebrae. He's not out of the woods yet. But he'll live? Eleanor's voice cracked on the last word. His prognosis is cautiously optimistic, the surgeon confirmed. The next 48 hours are critical. When can we see him? I asked. He's in recovery now. Once he's moved to ICU, you can see him briefly. Family only, I'm afraid, and just for a few minutes each hour. I glanced at Eleanor, saw the flash of pain cross her face. She's family, I said firmly. She comes in with me. The surgeon hesitated, then nodded. I'll have the nurse come get you when he's settled. After he left, Eleanor turned to me. Thank you, she said simply. He needs both of us, I replied. When we were finally allowed into the ICU, nothing could have prepared me for the sight of James, my vibrant, brilliant, always in motion husband, lying motionless among a tangle of tubes and wires. His face was swollen, partially obscured by an oxygen mask, his body immobilized in a specialized brace. I moved to one side of the bed, Eleanor to the other. I took his hand, careful of the IV line. Across from me, Eleanor did the same. James, I whispered, blinking back tears. We're here. Both of us. His eyelids fluttered but didn't open. The only response was a slight increase in his heart rate on the monitor. You need to fight, darling, Eleanor said, her voice stronger than I expected. Your stubborn streak should be good for something. I almost smiled through my tears. Trust Eleanor to approach even a life-threatening situation with brisk practicality. We were allowed only 5 minutes before the nurse gently ushered us out. In the hallway, Eleanor turned to me. I've canceled my meetings for the rest of the week. I'll be here. Me too, I said. I've already called in for a substitute teacher. She nodded, then hesitated. You should rest. Go home, shower, bring back some things he might need when he wakes up. I can't leave, I protested. I'll be here, Eleanor said firmly. I'll call immediately if anything changes. But one of us needs to be functional, and frankly, you look terrible. It was such an Eleanor comment, practical, slightly critical, yet grounded in genuine concern, that I actually laughed, a short, sharp sound that threatened to dissolve into sobs. You're right, I conceded. I'll go home, pack a bag, and come back. 2 hours, maximum. She nodded. I'll be right here. And she was. For the next 3 days, as James remained in critical condition, Eleanor and I established an unspoken rotation, one of us always at his bedside, the other catching brief moments of rest in the waiting room or cafeteria. We passed updates in the hallway, shared coffee from the vending machine, held each other up when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm us. On the 4th day, James opened his eyes. I was alone with him, Eleanor having reluctantly gone home to shower and change. His fingers twitched in mine, and when I looked up, his eyes were open, confused, pain-filled, but aware. Liv, he whispered, his voice raspy from the breathing tube that had been removed the previous day. I'm here, I said, tears streaming freely now. You're okay. You're gonna be okay. He tried to move, winced. What happened? Car accident. But you're stable now. The doctors say you're improving. I stroked his hand, the only part of him I could safely touch. Your mother's here too. She just went home to change. She'll be back soon. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. My mother? She hasn't left your side, I told him. Neither of us has. When Eleanor returned an hour later, I watched as she approached the bed with uncharacteristic hesitation. James, she said softly, welcome back. Mother, he managed, his voice still weak. Olivia says, you've been here. Of course I've been here, she replied, as if any other option was inconceivable. Someone needs to ensure these doctors don't make mistakes. James's lips curved in a small smile. Always taking charge. One of us has to, she said, but her usual crisp tone was softened by evident relief. In that moment, watching them together, I realized something fundamental had shifted. The crisis had stripped away pretenses, leaving only what mattered, our shared love for James and determination to see him recover. The next weeks were grueling. James was moved from ICU to a regular room, then to the hospital's rehabilitation wing. The spinal injury wasn't permanent, thank goodness, but recovery would be long and painful. Multiple surgeries, physical therapy, months before he could return to work full-time. Through it all, Eleanor and I formed an unlikely alliance. She used her considerable influence to secure the best specialists. I coordinated with James's company, ensuring his business ran smoothly in his absence. Together, we transformed his hospital room into something almost comfortable. Eleanor bringing in better linens and arranging for a private nurse during nights, me covering the walls with cards from my students and photos of our favorite places. One evening, as James slept, Eleanor and I sat in the small visitors area outside his room, sharing a container of soup from the decent cafe across the street. He's lucky to have you, she said unexpectedly. Your strength through all this has been remarkable. I looked up, startled by the compliment. Thank you, but I'm not doing anything you wouldn't do. That's precisely my point, Eleanor said, setting down her spoon. For years, I convinced myself you weren't strong enough for him. Too soft. Too accommodating. I was wrong. I blinked, unsure how to respond to this unprecedented admission. When I destroyed those wedding photos, she continued, her gaze direct, it wasn't just about disapproving of you. It was fear. Fear that you couldn't handle the life James leads, the pressures, the scrutiny, the potential for loss. You were testing me, I realized. All those dinner parties, the social humiliations, the exclusions. You were seeing if I would break. She inclined her head slightly. Not consciously, perhaps. But yes, in essence. And now? Now I've watched you handle a genuine crisis with more grace and fortitude than many of my so-called society friends could muster. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. You're stronger than I gave you credit for, Olivia. Different from me, but not lesser. Coming from Eleanor Wright, this was tantamount to a formal blessing. Thank you, I said simply. That means a lot. She nodded once, then picked up her spoon again, the moment of vulnerability passing but not forgotten. When James was finally released from the hospital, another challenge awaited. Our penthouse apartment, with its multiple levels and stairs, wasn't suitable for someone in a wheelchair and back brace. The doctors recommended a single-level living arrangement for at least 6 months. "You'll stay with me," Eleanor announced, not as a question, but a statement of fact. "The East Wing is all on one floor. I've already had the bathrooms modified for accessibility." James and I exchanged startled glances. Living with Eleanor? The woman who had once been my nemesis, who had systematically tried to undermine our relationship? "That's very generous," James said carefully, "but we couldn't impose. It's not an imposition, it's a practical solution," Eleanor cut in. "The house is large enough that everyone can have privacy. Olivia can commute to her school from there. It's only 15 minutes further. And I've had the small office converted into a remote workspace for your business calls." She looked between us. "Unless you'd prefer to rent somewhere temporary?" The truth was, Eleanor's solution made perfect sense. Her sprawling Georgian mansion was ideal for someone with mobility issues. The guest rooms in the East Wing were spacious and comfortable. And, practically speaking, having a third person to help with James's care would be invaluable. "If you're sure," I said slowly, "it would be helpful during his recovery." "Then it's settled," Eleanor said with satisfaction. "I'll have the rooms prepared immediately." And just like that, I found myself moving into my mother-in-law's home, the same home where I had once been made to feel so unwelcome, so aggressively excluded. The first few days were predictably awkward. Eleanor and I circled each other cautiously, establishing unspoken boundaries and routines. Who would help James with his morning exercises? Who would manage his medications? Who would field the constant stream of business calls and well wishes? Gradually, though, we found a rhythm. Eleanor took charge of medical appointments and physical therapy, leveraging her connections to adjust schedules when needed. I managed James's business affairs and created a comfortable environment in our temporary quarters, bringing in our own bedding, photos, books, the small touches that made it feel like home. To my surprise, Eleanor respected our space completely. She never entered our rooms without knocking, never questioned our decisions about James's care, never imposed her own preferences when they conflicted with ours. One evening, about 2 weeks into our stay, I found her in the kitchen making tea. "James is asleep," I said, leaning against the counter. "The new pain medication seems to be helping." She nodded, handing me a steaming cup. "Good. He needs proper rest to heal." We sat at the kitchen island, an oddly domestic scene that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. "I've been thinking," Eleanor said after a comfortable silence. "When James is recovered enough, you should take a vacation. Somewhere warm, the beach house in Maui perhaps." "That sounds wonderful," I agreed. "He'd love that." "I've already spoken to his doctor. He thinks by Christmas, James should be well enough for travel, with certain precautions." I smiled at her presumption, so typically Eleanor, making arrangements without consultation. But now it felt less intrusive, more supportive. "Thank you," I said sincerely, "for everything you've done these past months. The specialists, the house modifications, all of it." Eleanor waved away my gratitude. "He's my son. You're his wife. It's what family does." Family. The word hung in the air between us, significant and real in a way it had never been before. As the weeks passed, our temporary living arrangement evolved in unexpected ways. James grew stronger, graduating from wheelchair to walker to cane. Eleanor and I developed a shorthand for his care, anticipating needs, tag-teaming challenges, celebrating small victories together. More surprisingly, we began to genuinely enjoy each other's company. I discovered Eleanor had a dry, subtle wit I'd never appreciated before. She found I had a keen eye for art that she hadn't given me credit for. We talked about books, education policy, travel, conversations that had nothing to do with James or his recovery, just two women with more in common than either had imagined. One Sunday morning, I came downstairs to find Eleanor in her study, surrounded by photo albums and loose photographs. "What's all this?" I asked, gesturing to the organized chaos. "Overdue project," she replied, not looking up. I'm digitizing the family archives. Some of these photos are deteriorating. I moved closer, curious. On her desk lay images spanning decades. Eleanor as a young woman, James as a baby, family vacations, graduation ceremonies, holiday gatherings. May I? I asked, reaching for one that caught my eye. Eleanor nodded. Of course. The photo showed a much younger Eleanor holding infant James. Her expression a mixture of fierce love and absolute terror. The universal look of new motherhood that transcends time, class, and circumstance. You look exactly how I felt with my kindergartners on my first day teaching, I said with a smile. Completely in love and completely terrified of messing up. Eleanor's lips curved upward. An apt comparison. I had no idea what I was doing. My mother had employed nannies. She assumed I would do the same. But I wanted to be different. You wanted to be present, I said, understanding dawning. To be the primary influence in his life. She met my gaze directly. Yes, and then he grew up and chose a path I hadn't planned for him. Chose you. And that felt like rejection, I said softly. Like all your effort had been for nothing. Not for nothing, she corrected. But yes, it felt like displacement. Suddenly there was this other woman who knew things about my son that I didn't, who influenced him in ways I couldn't control. It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had. No pretense, no manipulation. Just raw truth. I never wanted to replace you, I told her. I just wanted to love him. I know that now, Eleanor said, turning back to her photos. It took me embarrassingly long to see it. I picked up another photo. James at perhaps 5 years old, proudly displaying a science project. Need help with these? I'm pretty good at digital organization. Eleanor hesitated only briefly. That would be helpful. Thank you. We spent the afternoon side by side, scanning photos, organizing them chronologically, Eleanor sharing stories behind certain images. James's first science fair, his middle school programming competition, the day he got his acceptance letter to MIT. When we reached more recent photos, I noticed something strange. There's a gap here, I said, flipping through the timeline we'd created. Nothing from about 2 years before James and I met until our wedding. Eleanor's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. I was preoccupied during that period. Took fewer photos. Something in her tone made me look closer. Eleanor, what happened during those years? She was silent for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. Then, carefully. I was ill. Breast cancer. Stage 3 by the time they caught it. I stared at her, stunned. James never told me. Because he doesn't know, she said simply. I never told him. You went through cancer treatment without telling your only child. I couldn't hide my disbelief. He was launching his company, working 20-hour days, pouring everything into making it successful. Her voice was matter-of-fact. What good would it have done to distract him with my problems? He could have supported you, been there for you. Precisely what I didn't want, Eleanor said firmly. I've never needed to be taken care of, Olivia. I didn't intend to start then. I thought about this woman, this proud, private, fiercely independent woman, facing mortality alone rather than risk being seen as vulnerable. Suddenly, so many things made sense. Her iron control, her fear of James making financially unsound choices, her initial resistance to anyone who might take him away from the secure path she'd mapped out. Does anyone know? I asked. My doctor, my private nurse during the worst of the treatments. She straightened a stack of photos with precise movements. And now you. The weight of her confidence settled on me. I won't tell him if you don't want me to. She nodded once, acknowledgement and gratitude in the gesture. I would prefer he never know. It's in the past. I'm 5 years clear. 5 years. Right around when James and I had met. When Eleanor had been at her most hostile, her most controlling. Fresh from a battle for her life, only to face what must have felt like another threat to everything she held dear. I understand better now, I said quietly. Why you fought so hard against me. Against us. It doesn't excuse my behavior, Eleanor said, ever precise. But yes, my perspective was distorted by recent events. Are you still being monitored? Regular checkups? Of course, I'm nothing if not thorough. I hesitated, then asked the question that had suddenly become urgent. Are you okay now? Truly? Eleanor looked up, surprise flashing briefly across her face. Yes, she said after a moment. I'm quite well now. Thank you for asking. Quote, that evening, as James slept and I sat alone in the garden, I thought about Eleanor's revelation. How it illuminated so much of her behavior, her fears, her desperate need to control her son's future when her own had been so uncertain. It didn't erase the hurt she had caused. It didn't justify the destroyed wedding photos or the social humiliations. But it offered context, dimension, humanity. Eleanor Wright wasn't just a wealthy, controlling mother-in-law from central casting. She was a complex woman who had faced mortality alone and emerged, determined to protect what mattered most to her. Understanding this changed something fundamental in how I viewed our shared history. Not erasing it, but reframing it. Not excusing past wounds, but making space for new growth. By Christmas, as Eleanor had predicted, James was well enough for limited travel. We took her up on the offer of the Maui Beach House, a stunning property on a private stretch of coastline that I hadn't even known the family owned. The night before our departure, Eleanor presented us with a gift. A new camera, top of the line, with all the accessories. For new memories, she said simply. The light in Maui is exceptional for photography. James embraced his mother, still careful of his healing back. Thank you, he said, for everything these past months. It's what family does, she repeated her earlier words, but this time her gaze included me in that definition. As James went to finish packing, Eleanor handed me a small envelope. One more thing, just for you. Inside was a key. What's this? I asked. The key to the beach house, she explained. Your name is now on the deed as well. I had the papers drawn up last week. I stared at her, speechless. James was always going to inherit it eventually, she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to add her once despised daughter-in-law to a multi-million-dollar property deed. This just accelerates the timeline and acknowledges your place in the family. Eleanor, I don't know what to say. Then say nothing, she advised practically. Just enjoy your vacation, take care of my son, take lots of photos. She turned to go, then paused. And Olivia, make sure some of those photos include you. You belong in the frame. Coming from the woman who had once systematically erased me from family images, who had torn our wedding photos to shreds in a desperate attempt to deny reality, this was more than a casual remark. It was a declaration, an acknowledgement, a promise. In that moment, standing in the grand foyer of a home where I had once been made to feel so unwelcome, I finally understood the truth. Some relationships aren't born. They're forged through conflict, crisis, and ultimately, choice. Eleanor and I would never have the easy affection of natural friendship. We were too different, our history too complicated. But we had built something perhaps more valuable: mutual respect, hard-won understanding, and the recognition that family isn't always about shared DNA or instant connection. Sometimes it's about the long, difficult journey towards seeing each other clearly, about acknowledging harm done and choosing to move forward anyway. About discovering that the person you once viewed as your greatest obstacle might actually become your most unexpected ally. My mother-in-law had destroyed our wedding photos in a moment of fear and desperate control. My tech billionaire husband had bought her debt in a moment of protective rage. But the real story wasn't in those dramatic flashpoints. It was in what came after: the patient rebuilding, the careful navigation of new boundaries. The gradual discovery that behind the society matriarch's perfect facade was a woman of remarkable resilience, who had faced death alone rather than burden her son. As we left for Maui the next morning, Eleanor stood in the doorway, elegant as always, waving goodbye. Not with the relief of someone glad to see us go, but with the subtle smile of someone who knew we would return to a home that now, improbably, belonged to all of us. Ready? James asked as our driver pulled away. I looked back at Eleanor's diminishing figure, then forward to the future stretching before us. Complex, unpredictable, but rich with possibility. Absolutely, I said, and meant it with my whole heart. If you've ever faced rejection from the people who should have embraced you, if you've ever had someone try to erase you from a narrative where you rightfully belong, know this: your story isn't over. Transformation is possible. Not through dramatic confrontations or perfect Hollywood endings, but through the quiet courage of showing up, speaking truth, and remaining open to the possibility that people, even people who have hurt you deeply, contain more complexity than you initially imagined. The photos on Eleanor's mantle now include images of James and me, displayed without reluctance or reservation. Our wedding album sits on her coffee table alongside other family treasures. And the woman who once sought to destroy evidence of our union now actively works to preserve it. Not because she's become someone else entirely, but because she's become more fully herself, more capable of growth, more willing to expand her definition of family to include someone she never expected to love. Have you ever experienced a relationship transformation you never thought possible? Share your story in the comments below. Because sometimes the most powerful inspiration comes not from tales of instant connection, but from journeys of hard-won understanding, the kind that can only be forged in the fire of conflict and emerge stronger for having been tested. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.